From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I'm Kijan Haynes. Welcome. Talks between the Colombian government and the ELN will continue next week in Havana, Cuba. The announcement comes after a meeting in Venezuela was held to discuss the next move. Talks have been taking place in Ecuador, but Ecuadorian President Lenin Moreno pulled out, citing tensions on the border with Colombia. The talks between the ELN and the Colombian government will focus on the creation of a new ceasefire agreement.
Besides the meeting with the FARC members and with former Spanish President Felipe González and former President of Uruguay, Pepe Mujica, today we have decided to restart next week the peace negotiations with the ELN front in order to agree on a ceasefire and make progress regarding the peace process. The negotiations will take place in Cuba, and we hope to obtain good results from this.
Y esperamos también ahí ir avanzando.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is campaigning in the state of Miranda. In a speech, he said that action was being taken to catch those responsible for corruption. He also gave details about how Venezuela is fighting an economic war against sanctions imposed by the US and other countries.
We are having a big issue that we have to face. The economic mafia that steals money from Venezuelan people. I started a counterattack against this mafia. With Paper Hands operation, we have detained 250 corrupt leaders that took our money to Colombia. They are in jail now, paying for their crimes. The oligarchs should be afraid, because the revolution against corruption has begun.
Our correspondent Ian Bruce was in a rally in Katia, which took place on Friday, files this report.
It's been another big and enthusiastic turnout for President Nicolas Maduro's campaign event here in the west of Caracas, in the popular neighborhood of Catia. He dealt, of course, with his usual campaign themes, the importance of getting 10 million votes on the 20th of May in order to try and rebuild a healthy economy in Venezuela. But he spent a lot of time also talking about corruption and asking for the help of the organized sections of the population, the communes, the communal councils, to help him root out corruption. Now this, of course, comes one day after the arrest of the directors of the Banesco Bank, 2 days after the Attorney General announced that it was being intervened and that a number of officials had been arrested from the bank, but also from the public sector officials, government officials, local officials, who apparently had been involved in that attempt to divert currency away from the Venezuelan population and speculated with it on the border with Colombia. Corruption is, of course, a deeply felt issue amongst the Chavista rank and file here, who resent that corruption when they see it amongst their own people. The other thing he talked about was Venezuelan sovereignty, defending Venezuelan sovereignty. And that's an issue that came up earlier in the day when there was an extraordinary meeting of all the heads of the different branches of government in Venezuela with Maduro to sort of reassert the unity of the government, which came, of course, a day after the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro, had backed, in an extraordinary way, a so-called verdict by the so-called parallel Supreme Court, now sitting in Miami, set up by Venezuela's opposition, which had declared that President Maduro was guilty of corruption in relation to Odebrecht, had demanded that he be arrested by the National Guard, and asking Interpol to issue a red alert for his arrest. Now, that may seem rather fantastic, that motion, but even more surprising is that the head, the Secretary General of the regional body, the Organization of American States, should give his backing to that.
Ian Bruce there reporting from Caracas. Now, Henry Falcon, the main opposition candidate in Venezuela's election, was speaking in Merida today, and he says he does not believe that the Banesco takeover by the state is a fight against corruption, but instead he says it's an attempt by the government to take remittances from abroad that are stored in the bank. He accused the Maduro campaign of running out of money and trying to dip into the bank for more funds. On Friday, Falcon criticized the leaders of the Democratic Unity Roundtable, the MUD, and he warned that they will disappear from the country's political landscape for failing to participate in the elections on May 20th and for calling on voters to abstain from voting. He reprimanded the group, saying the four parties taking part in the election believe in national unity, but those who have called for the boycott of the elections do not. Falcon is second in the opinion polls behind Nicolas Maduro. He also rejected the MUD's proposal to postpone the election until December. In other election news, but in Barbados, the Barbados Labour Party says it has received hundreds of complaints from voters about irregularities on the voters' list. They said some people were still listed at their old addresses, even though they had completed transfer forms, and in some cases, as many as 10 years ago. The BLP said in a letter that BLP said they sent a letter to the Electoral and Boundaries Commission aimed at securing a meeting to have the matter rectified. Now, Monday is the final day to register to vote. The BLP is launching their official campaign, revealing their list of candidates later today.
The difficulty with this is that you're now requiring people to go to vote at addresses they no longer reside at and in those areas. So on election day, they're going to be required to go extremely long distances in some instances, which obviously, it becomes a difficulty. Now, some of these transfers have been submitted since 2017. So clearly there has been enough time to have these people moved to the correct addresses. This still has not been done.
A little further off, Lebanon is preparing for its first parliamentary election in almost a decade. That's going to be held on Sunday. There are more than 500 candidates vying for 128 seats. The vote has been postponed a number of times over security concerns, and after much negotiation, there will be a system of proportional representation instead of a winner-take-all scenario. The Donald Trump administration in the U.S. has canceled a scheme offering temporary protection for thousands of Honduran immigrants. Up to 57,000 people could be forced to leave the U.S. by January 2020, when their temporary protected status will be revoked. Hondurans were granted this status after Hurricane Mitch hit Central America in 1998. The Department of Homeland Security said conditions in the country had notably improved since the disaster. Hondurans in the U.S. and human rights leaders have reacted with dismay to the decision.
I've been here in this country for 27 years. I came in 1992 and now I can't remember anything about my home country. I've contributed to this country since I got TPS. I've contributed to this country. I do my taxes. We are not criminals like they treat us, the Hispanics.
The 57,000 Hondurans that Trump wants to kick out of the U.S. are potentially going back to a country that today is significantly more dangerous for women, for indigenous, for LGBTQ, and for other minorities than it was at the time that they first left and got temporary protective status. We should need to say no more than that they are members of our community and they are under attack.
Let's take a short break now. Join us after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. welcome back. In Antigua and Barbuda, tensions continue between the government and the Barbuda People's Movement over the Barbuda Land Act. The BPM political leader Trevor Walker is accusing the government of taking autonomous decisions which will affect the people of Barbuda's land ownership. However, Prime Minister Gaston Brown says there will be consultation, but he accused the BPM of simply wanting to thwart any plans the government may have, so he's not giving the Barbuda Council any veto powers on decisions made.
This government is going down a road to unilaterally make decisions for Barbuda without even consultation.
What section did you read, eh?
Interpretation. What is wrong with consulting us on some of these matters? You're talking about a major development that's going to have a significant impact on the people who have lived there for over 300 years.
The reality is, Mr. Speaker, every time you mention anything about land reform in Barbuda, there are automatic threats coming from members of the BPM. We're not stupid. We know that any time at all we're to call a consultation to speak to land reform in Barbuda, that they will mash up the meeting. That's exactly what will happen. We know that based on how they have indoctrinated the Barbudan people, that there is no way that you could have a rational discussion about land reform with Barbudans. It will not happen. So to have called a consultation on this issue would have been an exercise in futility.
Foreign ministers from around the Caribbean will meet in the Bahamas next week to discuss Brexit impact on the region. Ministers will meet on Monday and Tuesday. The meeting will also discuss relations with the United States, Canada, the Commonwealth, the United Nations, and other major institutions. Attention will also be given to issues relating to reducing CARICOM's vulnerability to disaster risk and the effects of climate change. In El Salvador, family members, party leaders, militants, and followers of the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front, the FMLN, came out to the cemetery of Los Ilustriales in San Salvador to commemorate the 125th anniversary of the birth of Agustín Farabundo Martí. Martí dedicated his life to the international struggle for socialism. He was a firm opponent of the oligarchy in Latin America at the beginning of the 19th century. His anti-imperialist socialist legacy was taken by the Salvadorian left and used in the fight against successive dictatorships.
I feel proud to be here today since the party is committed to keep fighting, keep building the revolution, and to bring justice and freedom to our people. After Farabundo's execution, the oligarchy thought they could erase him from the map, but he re-emerged in the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front, which overthrew a dictatorship and created new ways to bring democracy for our people.
Farabundo Martí tiene la estatura del padre de la patria.
Farabundo Martí is the father of our nation. He was the social fighter of the Salvadorian poor people and working class people. He's a revolutionary symbol, and his legacy is part of the foundation of the FMLN party.
Our correspondent in El Salvador, Ernesto Avalos, has more of the celebrations of this revolutionary leader.
I'm at the Ilustre Cemetery where the remains of Agustín Farabundo Martí are buried. Today we commemorate the 125th anniversary of his birth. Many FMLN party members and family members have arrived here to remember and pay tribute to this revolutionary leader, who in 1932 was executed along with Luna and Zapata near to this cemetery. Farabundo Martí represented a revolutionary cause for several political leaders who in 1980 created the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front. This tribute is based on his social fight against oligarchy and his contribution to the poorest people of this country.
Thank Ernesto for that report. Now, a statue of Karl Marx has been unveiled in his hometown of Trier, Germany, to commemorate his 200th birthday. The sculpture, which is over 5 meters tall, depicts Marx looking thoughtful, holding a book in one hand. Marx has spent the first 17 years of his life in this area. The gift is from the Chinese government. Chinese President Xi Jinping is a huge fan of Karl Marx, calling him the greatest thinker of modern times. Now, the City Council voted in favor of accepting this gift from the Chinese government by 42 members to 7 back in March 2017. Now, the unveiling was met with some protest, as some see the Cold War division of the country and the erection of the Berlin Wall as a result of Karl Marx's ideas. And in the UK, British activist marked his birthday at a conference called Why Marx Was Right. Participants spent the day looking at Karl Marx from today's perspective and why his ideas are still popular and relevant. So we're joined live now from London, from the organizer of the conference, author Chris Nineham. So Chris, thanks a lot for joining us. And I guess the first question I'll ask is, in this age of capitalism, do you still find people who truly espouse the values of Karl Marx?
Well, I think one of the things that the conference discussed was the extraordinary way in which the kind of things Marx argued and wrote have a resonance today, have a kind of a relevance to the world that we face, the globalized world, the extent to which free market capitalism is destroying people's lives in a whole number of different and horrible ways across the planet. And I think, you know, it's very, very hard not to feel that his words really speak to us across 2 centuries. And that was the basis for the conference. And I think that it was a very young audience, it was a very big audience. I think his ideas are having some kind of a renaissance.
So what are some of the expectations of this event? Now, is there expected to be a revolution like Marx would have wanted, or do we just talk like a think tank of sorts where like minds get together?
No, it's very much a conference based on the idea that philosophers have interpreted the world, but the point is to change it. His famous quotation, and it was an activist conference largely. And I think one of the main things that was discussed in the British context was what are the limits to which a kind of reformist electoral project like we have and the left leadership of the Labour Party at the moment, what are the limits to that? Because Marx, you know, was a Democrat. He saw elections as very important, but he also saw the mass movement and kind of protest and working class struggle as being central. And it was really a discussion about the relationship. A lot of it was a discussion about the relationship between parliamentary change, between getting good delegates and deputies and MPs elected, and what the movement does more widely on the ground. And a good deal of it was that kind of discussion.
So at any point did anyone ask the question, what would Karl Marx think of, you know, today, or more specifically the government of Theresa May? Did that come up at all?
Not specifically about May, but I think there was people did say that, you know, I think if Marx did come back on his birthday today, we'd all be very pleased, and I think he'd be kind of alarmed and quite shocked at one level. But I don't really think he'd be surprised, because so many of the tendencies that we can see in the world today, the sort of precarity, the drive to lower wages, the attacks on welfare, the attacks on working class living standards across the world, all these things are trends and kind of the effects of capitalism that he documented when he was writing, that he saw. And when he was writing, the working class was tiny compared to what it is globally now. So, you know, he was actually prophetic. He was understanding the basic trends of a system that still dominates our lives.
Chris Nineham, thank you so very much. I know it's late, so I'll let you get back to it. We appreciate it.
Not at all.
Let's take another short break now. Join us again at this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. In Pakistan, at least 18 miners were killed and several trapped for hours inside a coal mine after 2 collapsed in different locations in the Balochistan province. Emergency services and ambulance rushed to the scene where a big crowd gathered. The mines are located near the city of Quetta and have reportedly collapsed due to the explosions. An explosion in the Gaza Strip killed 6 Hamas gunmen. The cause of the blast is unclear. The armed wing of the Islamist group Hamas, which controls the Gaza Strip, blamed Israel for the explosion. Reuters television captured a pillar of smoke rising above the village Zawaida near the coast of Gaza, far from the border where where tensions have escalated in recent weeks. Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has been detained after a rally in Pushkin Square against Vladimir Putin. Footage shows Navalny being lifted and taken away by police. He'd been delivering a speech to supporters moments before. Now he's called for demonstrations in more than 90 towns and cities across the country ahead of Vladimir Putin's inauguration for a 4th term as president. Hundreds more have been detained in protest. Protesters are calling for Putin's resignation, release of political prisoners, and renovation of the country's authority. Thousands flooded Mexico City streets to attend the annual Cinco de Mayo parade and festivities. Military units donned traditional uniforms and some performed in formation to Mexican tunes. More than 4,100 youngsters, along with a dozen musical groups and military units, participated in the 156th edition of the celebrations. Cinco de Mayo commemorates the Mexican Army's 1862 victory over France at the Battle of Puebla during the Franco-Mexican War between 1861 and 1867. Now, earlier this week, the world celebrated World Press Freedom Day, which highlighted many journalists around the world who are killed while doing their job. So far, 36 journalists have been murdered for this year, with Mexico being singled out as a particularly dangerous place for journalists. So, we are featuring this special report on the subject from members of our multimedia team. Mariana Goronga and Alejandro Ponce have this report.
2017 was one of the deadliest years in Mexico for journalists, with 13 murdered across the country. And in spite of all the outrage caused, those responsible have not been brought to justice.
My name is Jonathan Rosas. I'm 27 years old. I'm from Veracruz. I do photojournalism, documentary and artistic photography.
Jonathan, like dozens of journalists in Mexico, left the country a year ago after being threatened. In Veracruz, during Javier Duarte's government, 17 journalists were murdered, 5 disappeared, and dozens were exiled from Mexico. Among them was photojournalist Ruben Espinosa, a colleague and close friend with Jonathan. Ruben was threatened in Veracruz and went to Mexico City for protection, but he was murdered in 2015 in a Narvarte neighborhood along with 3 women.
After Ruben's murder, we realized that no journalist in Mexico is safe. I ran the archive of La Unión newspaper. 3 days before the anniversary of Ruben's death, someone broke into my house and stole my computer, my camera and my hard drives. The way it happened in Veracruz, and especially with my stuff being stolen, it felt like a sign. In that moment, I decided not to investigate. I thought the best thing to do was to try and avoid any violence that might follow. This crisis has made people stop investigating incidents like this, and I think that threats and violence are increasing. I don't know if in this electoral year something will change, but it looks like it won't.
So far in 2018, 36 journalists have been killed around the world. The most dangerous countries to be a reporter are in Afghanistan, Yemen, Colombia, and India.
Now, the Dakar Biennale is one of the continent's biggest exhibitions of African contemporary art, and it opens in the Senegalese capital in the city of Dakar. Now, that brings us to the end of this news brief with these and many other stories. You can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for Telesur English. I'm Kijan Haynes. Thank you for watching.